Cosmic Dreams, A Tale of the Crimson Gallant by Sean Barber. The vessel sails through the void. It is smaller than other vessels, sleeker. There are no others like it, and on its sides is a crimson streak, a mark of identity upon this spacecraft. From a distance, against a backdrop of a black void, dotted with pinpoint lights of the cosmos, the vessel appears to drift slowly in its journey across the infinite. Yet its travel is anything but slow. The vessel moves at speeds so fast that the human mind can scarce comprehend them. Speeds that allow it to travel across the stars, to visit distant planets yet unexplored. And as this ship travels, it approaches a system charted by observers but never visited by the great powers. Its inhabitants, a small crew from different backgrounds and homelands, watch as the group of planets orbiting a shining star draws closer. They anticipate new lands and new sights, never before seen by eyes such as theirs. When it happens quickly. It happens so quickly, in fact, that they barely even realize it is happening. In one instant, a light emerges around the vessel, envelops it, and drowns out all the world. The lone, small spacecraft is swallowed up, and its crew along with it. Vala stood to the side of the great hall of the temple, watching Matron Therese address the children before the statue of Uriel the Archangel. She often came here to meditate before the images of the saviors of humanity, but she also enjoyed watching the matron impart the teachings of the church to young minds. Absently, the apprentice rubbed her right forearm, before remembering herself and pulling her hand away, trying her best to ignore the itching. Having just recently turned 16, the apprentice Star Witch had just received her first tattoo, a set of 4 stars upon her arm. In time, she would receive more marks, until, like Matron Therese, her body was covered in an intricate star chart, symbolizing her connection to the infinite, the cosmos, and the void. When she became a true Star Witch, the power would flow through her, and her dark hair would become white, and her dark eyes would become shining blue, again like Matron Therese. But that was a minimum of 3 years away, and though Vala wore the robes of an apprentice, with long sleeves that hid her tattoo, she was nonetheless proud to bear the first of many markings. "Now, children," Matron Therese was saying, her blue eyes glowing with the power of the cosmos, the light of the stars which connected and gave life to all living beings, were kindly and surrounded by wrinkles. She was among the eldest of the matrons of this temple, and her wisdom and experience was valued by apprentices and full witches alike. "Who can tell me why we honor Uriel?" "He saved humanity," piped up a small boy with a shock of red hair. "He led us to the stars." The matron smiled at the boy, but shook her head. "Not quite," she told him. "It was the Primarch who led the exodus of man. When the demons poured forth upon our ancestral homeworld, God in heaven chose to abandon us, his children, to our fate. The Primarch rallied the people of Lost Terra, then known as Earth, and led our ancestors into the arcs, which took us into the infinite." "But Uriel still saved us," a little girl said. Matron Therese nodded. "He did indeed. Uriel alone was the archangel who chose to defy the traitor god and protect humanity from the demonic hordes. When the Primarch's ships left Lost Terra, the forces of damnation gave chase, and Uriel stood before them. He fought long and hard, and in the end, the archangel used the last of his strength to summon forth one final, mighty blow, which destroyed the pursuing demons and scorched the land of Lost Terra of their pestilence. His body still floats in orbit around our lost homeworld to this day, the site of the first temple of the Archangel. It was a story that Vala knew well. Like all apprentices, she had studied the Paramour's testament and learned the story of the Primarch and the Archangel, how they had worked together to save the human race from extinction. But still she enjoyed looking upon the faces of the young children when they heard the story. Many simply nodded and absorbed the information, but some were filled with awe at the sacrifice that had been made so that they may live today. Once, Vala had been one of these children, seated on the cold floor of the temple before a matron, trying to wrap her head around how deeply the Archangel must have cared for humanity, that he was willing to give his life so that they may live. It was a love that stood in stark contrast to the traitor god, and it was a love that had so impressed Vala that she had devoted her life to honoring his memory and his sacrifice. The children were now asking more questions of the matron, but Vala could not stay to listen. She still had many studies to complete before she became a full Star Witch, and she had allowed herself to become too distracted from her meditations. Standing, the dark-skinned young woman turned and left the great hall through one of the side passages, and journeyed deeper into the temple. The stonework of the temple was pristine white, specially manufactured as such materials were rare on Mars. Cleaners went through the entire temple every 2 days to ensure that dirt and grime did not build up on the immaculate stones, and the purity of the white halls was maintained. Vala walked through these white halls, a white robe fluttering about her with each step. Only her hood, pulled up to cover her still black hair, and her sleeves were a different color, the piercing blue which matched the color of a full Star Witch's eyes. These were the colors of the Church of the Archangel. A similar color scheme, albeit with a slightly different shade of blue, marked the government of the Primarchy itself. The similarities between the two groups' colors symbolized how intertwined they were, as the two great bastions of humanity in the galactic community. The Primarch, who slept in the heart of the lunar citadel, was, after all, the leader of mankind, and one of the most important figures in the church. Vala made her way through the winding halls toward the garden. When the great hall became too distracting, Vala would often meditate there instead. She preferred the grandiose statue of Uriel to watch over her meditations, but the vibrant life of the temple garden was just as soothing and, in its own way, awe-inspiring. The white halls leading to the garden were largely empty, which was unusual but not unheard of, especially in the mid-afternoon. Vala was alone with her thoughts even as she made the trek, and it took her a moment to realize that she could hear voices echoing through the temple. Vala. She stopped and listened, but the voices were silent. She had not recognized them, though admittedly they had been but whispers. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strangely familiar about them. Looking around, Vala could see no sign of anyone else in the hall, and so she continued walking until she came to a fork in the passageway. Vala! She stopped again and spun to her right, looking down the hall that extended there. At the end stood a figure with vibrant red hair. She held a black sword in her hand, and 2 horns grew from her head. A demon. Vala's heart grew cold, and her eyes widened in shock. This was impossible. How could such an unholy creature be here? The demon began to walk toward Vala, eyes seeming to shine with some horrific determination. Vala stepped back, unsure of what to do. She closed her eyes, muttering a quick prayer to the memory of the Archangel to give her the strength to survive this monster. Then Vala opened her eyes, and the demon was gone. She looked around, trying to see if she could spot any sign of the damned one. But she was alone in the white hallway. Had she imagined it? Slowly, Vala began walking down the left-hand passage, continuing her journey to the garden. What could have caused her mind to conjure such a terrifying vision? She couldn't seem to get the image out of her head. The demon's fierce look, her glowing red eyes, that awful black sword. Vala shuddered at the thought. Was she ill? Or perhaps something had entered her and touched her soul. That was a terrifying thought. Star Witches reached their minds out into the infinite, but not all forces of infinity were benevolent. Many forces of the cosmos, and especially the void, could be hostile and dangerous. If some void entity had touched Vala's soul, she would have to find it and purge it before it could do any serious damage to her. But the first step toward finding such an interloper would be meditation. Vala steeled herself as she approached the door to the garden. She needed to be calm and collected before she retreated to the refuge of her own mind. She emerged into the artificial sunlight of the garden. Vala walked slowly among the plants and flowers, down the stone path between the shrubs. In the center of the garden was a pond, with a single small island of grass in its center, connected to the stone pathway by a small bridge. Vala approached the pond, eyes occasionally running over the plants of the garden, searching for some sign of the demon's presence. But there was none. Vala stood in the garden, accompanied only by the soft trickling of the pond's water filters. It was quiet and peaceful here, free from the presence of damnation or corruption. Vala stepped across the wooden bridge and knelt on the little island, closing her eyes as she did so. She heard no sound but the water, felt nothing but the cool air of the garden. It was so peaceful here, so relaxing. She wondered if the demon had been just a trick of the light, or the result of an overactive imagination. Surely, if she had been touched by some malevolent entity, then this peace would be beyond her reach. Steadily, she breathed out until her lungs were emptied, and then, reaching out with her awareness as she did so, Vala breathed in. She could feel the light all around her, the light of the stars. It was the power of the cosmos, reaching out across the emptiness of the void. The cosmos and the void, two halves of the infinite. One was the life-giving light, and the other cold and deadly darkness. Within the light of the cosmos did the living dwell, but within the darkness of the void dwelt demons and other such beasts. To embrace the void was to embrace oblivion, and yet, to reject the void was also to embrace oblivion, for the light of the cosmos was searing and overpowering, and held back only by the cold of the void. To place oneself entirely within the cosmos, as the angels and the traitor god had, was to burn oneself to cinders. It was only in balance that one could thrive, though this balance was not one born from equilibrium. The cosmos must always be favored over the void, else life could not sustain itself. This was why calm meditation and careful contemplation was necessary. There was no easy answer to finding balance within the infinite. All must walk that narrow path themselves. Vala was but an apprentice, but one day she would be a Star Witch. The Star Witches were those of humanity who were most attuned to the cosmos, and as such they were the ones who most vitally needed to reach that balance. Vala relaxed her body and allowed the cosmos to flow through her, though only through certain points. She opened the gates within her forehead and within her lower back, feeling the warmth of starlight within her body. To open any more gates would be to risk being overwhelmed. She breathed in deeply once more, allowing the warmth to fill her. And then she breathed out, dispersing the excess light that flowed through her body as she did so. Eyes still closed, Vala gave herself over to the sensation of the cosmos within her body, becoming one with the power within her, controlling it as she would control her own breathing. Vala! The voice was so distant and so subtle that she at first did not notice it. And then the call repeated itself. Vala! What was that? Was someone speaking to her? Her eyes drifted open, and a hand seized her shoulder. "Open your eyes!" the demon woman shouted. She was inches away from Vala's face, expression wild and desperate. Her red hair was tangled about, her black horns nearly invisible in the darkness. The light in the garden had vanished, and Vala and the demon were surrounded by black. Behind the terrifying woman, red tendrils began to emerge from the darkness, reaching out toward the pair, glowing softly as if a furnace raged deep within them. Vala screamed and pulled away from the demon. She fell backward into the water, the cold enveloping her as she gasped for breath. She threw herself out of the pond, back onto dry land. "Are you all right, dear?" Vala blinked. The garden was bright again. The demon and those awful red tendrils were gone. She found herself looking up into the concerned blue eyes of Matron Therese. "You were with the children," Vala said softly. "In front of the statue of Uriel. I just saw you there." Matron Therese frowned. "That was over an hour ago, child," she said. "Were you so deep in your meditation that you lost track of time?" She reached down and helped Vala to her feet. "What happened?" I'm not sure." Vala shivered, both from the cold of the water and the terror that was slowly tightening its grip around her heart. "I fear something wicked may have touched my soul, matron. I keep seeing a demon." The matron studied her face. "When and where?" she asked. "First in the hall," Val told her. "It called out to me, said my name. She was holding a black sword. And then, just now, the demon was grasping my shoulders. She was shouting at me. She told me to open my eyes." Matron Therese was silent for a moment. "Come, child," she said at last. "Let's get you dried off, and then we can perhaps work out how this creature is communicating with you." Vala lay in bed, eyes closed, waiting for sleep to take her. She had spent 3 hours meditating with Matron Therese, seeking to bolster her own spiritual defenses and locate whatever weakness was allowing this demon to speak with her. The matron seemed confident that Vala was now in a better position to weather any infernal influences, though Vala herself was unsure. "You keep tossing and turning," her roommate Claudia said from her own bed. Vala opened her eyes and stared up into the darkness. Today was difficult. There was silence, and then Claudia said, "But you feel better now, right? Stronger?" "I suppose." "I heard you saw a demon." Vala frowned. She didn't want it to become gossip that she was seeing demons. "Where did you hear that?" "Around," Claudia said dismissively. "But I don't think you were seeing a real demon. Think about it. We're in the temple. How could demons come here?" Vala didn't have an answer for that. "You're probably just tired," Claudia told her. "Seeing things." "Maybe," Vala admitted. She hoped that it was true, but the demon had seemed so real. "You should relax," Claudia told her. "Relax and not worry so much. Spend an evening with Graxon and take your mind off things." "Graxon?" Vala sat bolt upright. She knew that name, and yet... "What?" Claudia asked. "Who's Graxon?" "What are you talking about?" "You said I should spend an evening with Graxon." "No, I didn't," Claudia insisted. "I said you should spend an evening relaxing." Vala shook her head. Who was Graxon? She felt like she should know that name, but she'd never met anyone named Graxon. Who? A vision came to Vala's mind. A memory? She was on a vessel out in the infinite. Her body was covered in the tattoos of a full star witch. She was seated alone in the mess, eating. And then a man walked in, a Theraloid, with his green skin and his 3 eyes. Vala had thought the aliens looked strange at first, but she had quickly grown used to them, and there was something about them that she found oddly fascinating. She shook her head. No, that was wrong. She'd never met a Theraloid before. And yet, that memory seems so real. She knew that the Theraloid was named Graxon, that on that night she had shared her first conversation with him. She knew that they had grown closer throughout the rest of their time on that ship, and that she'd thought she'd never see him again. And then they'd both been recruited to... Vala? Claudia asked. Are you all right? No, Vala whispered. This already happened, or... Wait, it never happened. Not like this. There was no demon. I didn't know Graxon yet. You slipped up. Huh? Claudia asked. You're still on that Graxon thing? There's no Graxon. Yes, there is. A third voice had spoken that, and suddenly the lights in their room switched on. Vala spun her head to look in the direction of the speaker. It was the demon woman again. She stood there holding a black sword in one hand. With her other, she pushed her red hair behind her black horns. No, not a demon. Half demon. Demon-blooded. Alice? Vala asked. The demon-blooded woman smiled. Good to see you, Vala. What's going on? Before Alice could answer Vala's question, Claudia leapt from her bed, pointing at Alice, eyes wide with horror. Demon! She cried. Demon in the temple! Alice scowled and rushed forward. Vala realized what was about to happen a split second before it did, and she screamed for Alice to stop, but it was too late. The black sword sliced through Claudia's chest and stomach, and Vala's roommate was split open. And yet, there was no blood. Instead, a writhing mass of tendrils, seemingly formed of red light, burst from Claudia's body and lashed out at Alice. The demon-blooded woman slashed at the tendrils and yelled at Vala, Remember the Crimson Gallant! Remember what happened! Vala shook her head. Her body was shivering. She couldn't seem to tear her eyes from the monstrosity that was emerging from Claudia. Larger tentacles suddenly burst from her roommate's corpse, wrapping themselves around Alice's limbs and pulling her toward the body. Remember! Alice shouted again, as Claudia's wound gaped open in a grotesque parody of a mouth, and red tentacles pulled Alice into it. Vala was running out of the room before she realized it. What was happening? She knew Alice, and yet she didn't. She knew Graxon, and yet she didn't. Vala could remember graduating into a full Star Witch and leaving the temple, and yet no monsters with glowing red tentacles had attacked her in her time there. She turned a corner and ran straight into Matron Therese. Matron, Vala gasped. Something's wrong. I remember. This already happened, but it didn't happen like this. I shouldn't be here. I already left here. I should be on the Crimson Gallant. We were traveling to an uncharted system. Then there was this light, and... She trailed off. You're not real. Matron Therese sighed. Oh, child, she said, you need to relax. Forget all your troubles and let yourself sink back into the dream. Vala took a step back. Who are you? I'm Matron Therese, the matron said with a smile. Your beloved teacher. You're not. Fine. I'm your memory of her. Now relax, Vala. There's nothing to fear. It will all be over soon. No! Vala screamed, and the matron opened her mouth. Tendrils of red light erupted from between her lips, stretching their way out toward Vala. Before she could move, they were wrapped around her, pulling her toward the matron. Relax, Matron Therese's voice said. It was joined by Claudia's voice, then Vala's own. Relax, they chanted. Relax. Vala closed her eyes. She opened herself up to the infinite, and then, summoning as much strength of will as she could, she pushed at the illusion around her. A lance of pain stabbed through her head, and Vala was engulfed in searing white light. She opened her eyes, feeling the cold floor of the Crimson Gallant's bridge beneath her limbs. The Crimson Gallant. Vala was on board the Crimson Gallant, an experimental survey ship created by the Primarchy. She served as the vessel's Star Witch under the command of Captain Tylanus Scion. She served alongside the security officer Alice Downing, alongside the xenobiologist Fury Marcel do Fanros E. Sparrowtail, alongside the geologist, Graxon. Groaning, Vala lifted her head from the floor and looked around the bridge. Red tendrils covered the walls. They bore into chrome, the ship's silica form. She could see red glows beneath the surface of his steely flesh. They bore into the other members of the crew as well, all of them unconscious, though Alice kept twitching. She was fighting to break out of this thing's hold, fighting to reach the dreams it had imprisoned the others in and free them. Vala climbed to her feet. "You're not of the void," she said softly. "You are a creature of the cosmos, forged in the light of a star, a parasite that feeds on the minds of others. How long have you waited in the star system for someone to stumble upon you? Or perhaps others have, and you have fed on them, trapped them within their own memories so they didn't notice you devouring their souls. Well, regardless, you made a mistake today, creature. Get out of my friends." Red light filled the bridge, and within that light Vala saw a mouth opening wide, tentacles lashing about it. She stepped back, gathering her strength to push at the creature, but one of the tentacles lashed itself around her wrist. Vala shouted in pain. The tendril burned to the touch, as if fire was raging through the veins in her wrist, up her arm and to her heart. With a scream of effort, Vala pushed at the creature's presence, putting all her soul, all her power into the attack. The light receded a bit, but then it surged forward with renewed vigor. A screeching sound filled her ears as the parasite bellowed at her. This wasn't working. The parasite was too strong. Vala needed help. Her eyes flickered to Alice's twitching form. The demon-blooded had managed to fight her way into Vala's dream and break through the creature's illusions. Perhaps. Vala closed her eyes and extended her consciousness out to Alice. She stretched and strained, reaching as far as she could, trying to make contact. All at once, the pain and the screeching and the red light vanished, and Vala found herself standing in cold darkness. There was a silver light ahead of her, some distance away. She took a step toward it. Something crunched beneath her foot, and Vala looked down and gasped. Bones. The ground was covered in them. Human bones, skulls staring up at her with their empty eye sockets and frozen grins. Vala had been trapped in her memories, but looked as if Alice had been trapped in a nightmare. Or had she? The woman was demon-blooded after all. Violence and darkness and evil ran in her blood. Vala would be the first to admit that Alice had done an admirable job fighting against the wickedness that dwelled in her soul, but still, she'd never been comfortable sharing a living space with a woman who was half monster. After all, one never knew when she might give in to her darker nature. Taking a deep breath, Vala slowly made her way across the sea of bones toward that silver light. As she approached, she realized that there were two shapes within the light, and with every step those shapes took on a clearer form. Alice sat on a mound of skulls and ribs. She was staring down at her hands and the black sword that she held in them. Wisps of inky smoke wafted from the blade, curling about in the air as they faded into the light above. Alice did not move. She simply stared at the sword. "Alice?" Vala asked. "They're dead," Alice told her. "They're all dead." "Did you kill them?" Vala wondered. But she thought better than to voice that question. "Alice, this isn't real." "It may as well be," Alice replied. She lifted her gaze from the sword and looked out over the bones that littered the dark chamber. "I think I prefer the bones, actually. It's cleaner than how things really looked." Vala froze, suddenly less sure about approaching the demon-blooded woman with the sword. That's not what I meant, she said. That creature, that parasite, it trapped you in here. But you can fight it, Alice. You already have. You helped me pull away from it. Remember? Alice shook her head. Lady, I don't even know who you are, she said. What's a Star Witch doing on Shimhazi anyway? Shimhazi? The name sounded familiar. A forbidden moon, claimed by Hell. What connection did Alice have to that place? I'm not here, Vala told her. And neither are you. Remember, Alice? The Crimson Gallant? You tried to pull me from the illusion in the garden and then again in the dorm. Remember? Alice frowned. Maybe? She said. I don't know. This doesn't make... None of this... She shook her head and stood up. Bones clattered from the mound onto the floor, clanging and splashing. Vala looked down and shuddered. Blood was beginning to pool below her. Alice, please, she said. You need to wake up. I can't fight this thing alone. The Crimson Gallant, Alice muttered. That name is supposed to be important. It's the ship we serve on. Alice shook her head. He named it after something forbidden. His sister wasn't happy. Vala blinked. What? The captain's rebellious, Alice continued. He chose the name as a small act of rebellion. He knows things. Things people aren't supposed to know. Dangerous secrets. It's why the deputy director wanted me to keep watch of him. Keep him in line. Deputy director? Vala asked. Sister, are you talking about Viln Scion? Viln was Captain Tylanus' sister, the deputy director of the Office of Divine Providence. What was Alice talking about? Vala shook her head. No, it's not important. You need to wake up, Alice. You need to fight it. Please, I need your help. Alice slowly turned to look at her. You? She asked. I've seen the way you look at me, Vala. I know you don't trust me. I'm just a demon as far as you're concerned, so why... She was cut off as tendrils of red light suddenly swarmed around them. Vala jumped back, narrowly avoiding one, and fell down onto the bones and blood. Oh, Alice said, raising her black sword. How did I forget about this? If Vala hadn't been so terrified, she would have barked a laugh at the absurdity of that reaction. Mental traps or something. I don't know how it works. We just need to... A red tentacle slammed into her, and Vala abruptly found herself standing on the bridge of the Crimson Gallant once more, struggling against burning tentacles in that red glow. Damn you! She spat through gritted teeth. Damn you! What was it she had said earlier? That it had attacked her friends? What a joke. Vala was only close to Graxon. Everyone else was an acquaintance at best, and Alice... She'd been cruel to Alice, hadn't she? Letting her fear guide her in all her interactions. And only now, moments before her death, did Vala realize just how little she knew of the woman. Alice was right to resent her. Vala tried once more to push against the parasite, but it was to no avail. The creature seemed impervious to everything. And then a black sword cut its way through the center of the red light, and the parasite screeched in pain as the light dimmed. The tentacles holding Vala loosened, and she seized the opening. Gathering what little power still remained in her, Vala lashed out with every ounce of will she could muster. The light seemed to shatter around her. The parasite let out one final shriek of agony before the glow faded from the bridge and the tentacles that held the crew of the Crimson Gallant withered into nothingness. Vala fell to her knees, gasping for breath. She didn't know how long she stayed down there before Alice knelt beside her. Thank you, Alice said. The Star Witch nodded. She didn't know what to say. There was so much she felt needed to be said, and yet she couldn't seem to find the words for any of it. But Alice seemed to understand. Come on, she said. Let's check on the others. Vala climbed unsteadily to her feet, and, as Alice checked on the captain, she rushed over to the prone, green form of Graxon. Graxon? She asked, holding his face in her hands. Graxon, are you all right? The Theraloid groaned, and slowly his 3 eyes opened. Vala? He asked. I had the weirdest dream. This time, Vala did laugh. Yeah, she told him. Yeah, me too. Thank you for listening to Cosmic Dreams. If you enjoyed this story and would like to read or hear more tales of the Crimson Gallant, then head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/SeanWrightStuff. That is SeanNWritestuff. 2 N's and Sean. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.